The kitchen clock ticked past midnight when my wife Lydia finally said the words that would destroy everything we'd built together. We'd been arguing about money again, specifically the mysterious $5,000 withdrawal from our joint account that she couldn't explain. "You want to know where the money went, Brooks?" Lydia's voice carried that sharp edge I'd learned to recognize over our 5 years of marriage. She stood by the granite countertop, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping a wine glass like a weapon. "Fine, I'll tell you everything." I sat at our kitchen table, surrounded by the financial documents I'd been reviewing. As a forensic accountant, I had a talent for spotting irregularities in numbers. What I hadn't expected was discovering them in my own household finances. "I still love my ex, Julian," she said, her words cutting through the silence like a blade. "We've been seeing each other behind your back for 5 years. I froze. 5 years. Our entire marriage. Lydia laughed, a sound I'd once found charming, but now recognized as cruel. "You thought you were my husband, Brooks, but you were always just my financial safety net. Julian is the man I actually love." The documents scattered across our table suddenly made perfect sense. The unexplained withdrawals, the business trips that didn't align with her boutique schedule, the expensive gifts she claimed were samples from vendors. Every anomaly I'd noticed and dismissed as innocent mistakes now revealed themselves as deliberate deceptions. 5 years, I repeated, my voice steady despite the chaos in my mind. "Every day of our marriage," she confirmed, refilling her wine glass with the expensive bottle I'd bought to celebrate our anniversary last month. "Julian needed money for his investments, his business ventures. I helped him, because that's what you do for the person you actually love." I remained silent, watching her pace around our renovated Victorian kitchen. Lydia had always been beautiful, the kind of woman who turned heads when she walked into a room. Her boutique, Lydia's Loft, catered to Ashcroft's wealthier residents, and she'd built a reputation as the town's fashion authority. What I hadn't realized was that she'd been funding her true love's failed enterprises with money stolen from our accounts. "You're not going to say anything?" she demanded, stopping in front of me. "No dramatic reaction? No shouting?" I looked up at her, noting how her designer dress probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "What would you like me to say?" "I don't know. Something. Anything. You're always so..." She gestured vaguely. "Boring. Julian has passion, fire. He makes me feel alive." "And I make you feel financially secure," I said. "Exactly." She smiled as if I'd finally understood something important. "You're stable, Brooks, predictable, safe. But Julian is exciting. He's building an empire, and I want to be part of that." I gathered the financial documents into a neat pile. Years of marriage to Lydia had taught me to recognize when conversations were over. This one had ended the moment she confessed to 5 years of adultery and theft. "Where are you going?" she asked as I stood up. "To bed," I said simply. "That's it? That's your response to everything I just told you?" I paused at the kitchen doorway. "What response were you expecting?" "I don't know. Fight for me. Get angry. Show some emotion. Good night, Lydia." I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, listening to her frustrated sighs echoing from the kitchen below. She'd expected drama, tears, perhaps even violence. Instead, she got the same measured response I'd give to discovering irregularities in a client's books: acknowledgement, analysis, and appropriate action. But Lydia had made a critical error in her calculations. She'd assumed that my calm demeanor meant I was weak, that my preference for logic over emotion made me passive. What she didn't understand was that forensic accounting had taught me patience. The best investigations took time to develop. The most satisfying conclusions came to those who planned carefully and executed methodically. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I lay in bed listening to Lydia's phone conversations with Julian downstairs. She was telling him about our argument, laughing about my pathetic reaction to her confession. They made plans to meet the next day to celebrate her freedom. At 5 in the morning, while Lydia slept off her wine, I quietly packed a single suitcase with essential items. I left my wedding ring on the dresser next to a note that simply said, "Thank you for your honesty." Then I drove to my office above the Drowned Dog Bar on Main Street and began the most important audit of my career. My office hadn't seen this much activity since I'd investigated the mayor's embezzlement scandal 3 years ago. Documents covered every surface: bank statements, credit card records, business receipts, and tax returns spanning our entire marriage. What I discovered in those first 48 hours would have impressed even my most demanding clients. Lydia Harper wasn't just an unfaithful wife. She was a sophisticated financial criminal. The boutique's books revealed a masterclass in creative accounting, phantom inventory purchases that never arrived, vendor payments to companies that existed only on paper, cash transactions with no corresponding merchandise. Every trick pointed to the same conclusion. Lydia had been systematically embezzling from her own business to fund Julian's various failed ventures. My phone buzzed with another angry text from Lydia. She'd discovered my absence and wasn't pleased. "Where are you? We need to talk about this like adults." I ignored the message and continued working. The beauty of forensic accounting lies in its objectivity. Numbers don't lie, even when the people manipulating them do. And Lydia's numbers told a fascinating story of greed, deception, and criminal stupidity. Julian Marks, according to my research, was a 45-year-old serial entrepreneur whose businesses failed with remarkable consistency. In the 5 years since Lydia and I had married, he'd launched and bankrupted 4 different companies: a food truck venture, a cryptocurrency trading firm, a boutique fitness studio, and most recently, a craft brewery that never actually produced any beer. Each failure had been funded, at least partially, by money stolen from Lydia's boutique. The paper trail was so clear that even a first-year accounting student could have followed it. Lydia had been transferring money to Julian through fake vendor payments, inflated expense reports, and outright cash theft from her register. The total amount stolen exceeded $200,000. My friend Mick knocked on my office door around noon. "Brooks, you in there? Heard you've been burning the midnight oil." Mick Sullivan had been my closest friend since high school. He owned a small construction company and possessed the rare ability to mind his own business while still being available when needed. Today, I needed someone to witness what I was about to do. "Come in," I called. Mick surveyed the document-covered office with raised eyebrows. "Jesus, Brooks, looks like you're preparing for war." "More like preparing for justice," I said, organizing the evidence into labeled folders. "I need you to witness something." I explained Lydia's confession and my subsequent investigation. Mick listened without interruption, his expression growing more serious with each revelation. "So, what's your plan?" he asked when I finished. I pulled out a large manila envelope and began filling it with copies of the most damning evidence: bank records showing transfers to Julian's accounts, forged invoices for non-existent merchandise, cash register reports with obvious discrepancies, tax documents that would make the IRS very interested in Lydia's business practices. "I'm going to give her exactly what she gave me," I said. "The truth." "Brooks, man, you need to be careful here. This is some serious stuff." "That's exactly why it needs to be done properly." I sealed the envelope and wrote Lydia's name on the front in block letters. She confessed to adultery, but she also confessed to something much worse without realizing it. Every time she mentioned giving Julian money for his businesses, she was admitting to theft. Mick helped me make copies of everything. We worked in silence, the only sounds coming from the bar downstairs and the steady rhythm of the copy machine. When we finished, I had 3 complete sets of evidence: one for Lydia, one for my attorney, and one for the appropriate federal authorities. "You're really going to turn her in?" Mick asked. "She turned herself in," I corrected. "I'm just making sure the right people hear her confession." At exactly 3 p.m., I drove to Lydia's boutique. She was helping a customer select a dress that probably cost more than most people's car payments. I waited outside until the customer left, then approached the door. Lydia saw me through the window and her expression shifted from relief to suspicion. She unlocked the door and stepped outside. "Brooks, thank God. Where have you been? We need to talk about last night. I said things I didn't mean." "You meant every word," I said, handing her the envelope. "This is for you." She took it hesitantly. "What is it?" "A complete audit of your business activities for the past 5 years. I thought you might find it interesting reading." Her face went pale. "Brooks, what did you do?" "My job," I said simply. "I'm a forensic accountant, Lydia. Did you really think I wouldn't notice $200,000 in theft?" "Theft? Brooks, you're being dramatic. That money went to legitimate business investments. Julian's businesses aren't your businesses, and using your boutique's accounts to fund them is embezzlement. Federal embezzlement, since you crossed state lines for some of the transactions." Lydia clutched the envelope with trembling hands. "You can't prove anything." "I don't have to prove anything. You already confessed. Last night, you admitted to taking money from our accounts to give to Julian. What you didn't realize is that our accounts include your business accounts, which makes your confession an admission of criminal activity." "Brooks, please, we can work this out. We can go to counseling." "Open the envelope, Lydia." She tore it open with shaking fingers and pulled out the documents. I watched her face as she realized the scope of my investigation. Every fraudulent transaction, every forged invoice, every illegal transfer. It was all there, documented with the precision that had made me one of the region's most respected forensic accountants. "This is everything," she whispered. "That's a copy," I said. "The originals are already in the hands of people who care very much about this kind of thing." "What people?" "The kind who wear badges and carry handcuffs." Lydia's knees buckled slightly. She leaned against the boutique's window for support. "Brooks, you can't do this to me. I'm your wife." "You were my wife. Now you're just another criminal who got caught." I turned to leave, but her voice stopped me. "Julian will never forgive me for this." I looked back at her, noting how small she seemed clutching that envelope. "Lydia, Julian is about to have much bigger problems than forgiveness. He's listed as a co-conspirator in every transaction. Whatever you're facing, he's facing the same thing. But he didn't know the money was stolen. He knew it was coming from your business accounts. He knew you were married to someone else. And he knew his own businesses were failing. Ignorance isn't a defense when you're spending other people's money." I left her standing outside her boutique, holding the evidence of her own destruction. As I drove away, I could see her in my rearview mirror, frantically dialing her phone, probably calling Julian to warn him about what was coming. It wouldn't matter. The wheels of justice, like the wheels of a well-conducted audit, move with inevitable precision once they start turning. The next morning brought the kind of chaos that only federal investigators can create. I watched from my office window as unmarked cars surrounded Lydia's boutique. Men and women in dark suits carried boxes of evidence from the building while Lydia stood on the sidewalk, her designer clothes wrinkled and her perfect hair disheveled. My phone had been ringing all morning. Reporters, neighbors, even some of Lydia's customers wanted to know what was happening. I ignored them all and focused on the legal documents my attorney had prepared: divorce papers, asset protection filings, and a formal statement for the federal investigation. "Brooks Harper?" The voice belonged to a woman in her 50s wearing a badge that identified her as Agent Sarah Chen from the Financial Crimes Division. "I'm here about your whistleblower report." "Please, come in." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "I assume you've had a chance to review the evidence?" "Very thoroughly. Your documentation is remarkably complete. Most financial crime cases take months to build this kind of evidence trail." "I had 5 years to observe the patterns," I said. "I just didn't realize what I was observing until recently." Agent Chen opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. We've arrested Julian Marks this morning. He was attempting to board a flight to Mexico when our agents found him. Running away? With a suitcase full of cash and a fake passport, not the behavior of an innocent man. She flipped through several pages. His bank records show deposits totaling over $200,000 from your wife's accounts. He's claiming ignorance about the source of the funds. That's going to be difficult to prove, given the email correspondence we found on his computer. Detailed discussions about which of your wife's business accounts had the most available cash. Instructions on how to structure the transfers to avoid detection. Mr. Marks was very much aware that the money was stolen. I felt a satisfaction that had nothing to do with vindication and everything to do with justice. What about Lydia? She's cooperating fully, provided a complete confession in exchange for consideration during sentencing. She's admitted to embezzling approximately $230,000 over 5 years. More than I calculated. She had some creative techniques you hadn't discovered yet. Fake returns, phantom employees, even a scheme involving counterfeit designer merchandise. Agent Chen closed the folder. Your wife is a very talented criminal, Mr. Harper. She just wasn't as smart as she thought she was. After Agent Chen left, I walked downstairs to the Drowned Dog for lunch. The bar was buzzing with gossip about the morning's arrests. Ernie, the owner, poured me a beer without being asked. Hell of a thing, Brooks, he said. Never would have suspected Lydia of being a crook. People are full of surprises, I said. Heard she was cheating on you too, with that Julian character. Among other things. Ernie leaned closer, lowering his voice. Word is, you're the one who turned them in. That true? I took a long drink of beer before answering. I reported financial crimes to the appropriate authorities. What they did with that information was their decision. Good for you, man. Takes guts to do the right thing, even when it's family. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Nina Greer, Lydia's former assistant and closest friend. She marched up to my table with the kind of righteous anger that only comes from misplaced loyalty. Brooks Harper, you should be ashamed of yourself, she announced loudly enough for the entire bar to hear. Lydia is sitting in a jail cell because of you. Lydia is sitting in a jail cell because she stole over $200,000, I replied calmly. She made some mistakes, but she didn't deserve this. You destroyed her life over money. I documented her crimes. She destroyed her own life. Nina's voice rose higher. She loved Julian. Real love. Something you obviously don't understand. You were never good enough for her anyway. The bar had gone quiet. Every patron was watching our confrontation with the kind of fascination usually reserved for traffic accidents. I stood up slowly, noting that Nina was trembling with anger. Nina, let me explain something to you, I said in the same tone I used for difficult clients. Lydia didn't steal money because she loved Julian. She stole money because she's a thief. Julian didn't accept stolen money because he loved Lydia. He accepted it because he's a criminal. Love doesn't excuse felonies. You're heartless. I'm realistic. And if you helped Lydia with any of her schemes, you might want to consider hiring an attorney. The federal investigation is just getting started. Nina's face went white. She turned and fled the bar without another word. The other patrons slowly returned to their conversations, but I could feel their eyes on me. In a town the size of Ashcroft, I'd just become either a hero or a villain, depending on who was doing the judging. Mick appeared at my table a few minutes later. That was intense. Nina's scared, I said. People don't get that angry unless they have something to hide. You think she was involved? I think Nina knew exactly where Lydia's money was going and never asked any uncomfortable questions. Whether that makes her legally culpable remains to be seen. Mick ordered a beer and sat down across from me. So, what happens now? Now we wait for the legal system to do its job. I pulled out my phone and showed him a text message from my attorney. Lydia's agreed to a plea bargain, 5 years in federal prison, full restitution, and an uncontested divorce. 5 years? She could have gotten 15. Cooperation has its benefits. And Julian? Julian's going to trial. His attorney thinks he can beat the charges by claiming he didn't know the money was stolen. I finished my beer and stood up. He's about to learn that ignorance isn't a defense when you're dealing with federal prosecutors who have email evidence of your guilt. As I walked back to my office, I passed the boutique that had once been Lydia's pride and joy. Federal seizure notices covered the windows, and a small crowd of curious onlookers gathered on the sidewalk. Someone had already started a rumor that the building would be sold at auction to cover Lydia's restitution payments. The irony wasn't lost on me. Lydia had built her boutique as a symbol of her success and independence. Now it would be liquidated to pay for her crimes. Julian's grand dreams of entrepreneurial empire had ended with him in handcuffs at an airport, and I, the boring accountant who was supposed to be just a financial safety net, had emerged as the architect of their destruction. Justice, I reflected, had a sense of humor almost as dry as mine. 6 months later, I sat in the federal courthouse watching Julian Marks destroy himself on the witness stand. His attorney had made the fatal mistake of letting him testify in his own defense. Julian, ever the charming entrepreneur, thought he could convince a jury of his innocence through sheer charisma. He was wrong. "Mr. Marks," the prosecutor said, holding up a printed email. "This is a message you sent to Mrs. Harper on March 15th of last year. Would you please read the highlighted portion to the jury?" Julian squirmed in his chair. "I'd rather not." "Your Honor, would you please direct the witness to answer the question?" The judge, a stern woman in her 60s who had no patience for evasion, nodded. "Mr. Marks, please read the highlighted text." Julian cleared his throat. "It says, 'The brewery equipment loan is due next week. Can you pull another $20,000 from the boutique account? Make sure Brooks doesn't see the transfer.' And this email is addressed to Lydia Harper, the defendant's married lover, correct?" "Correct." "The same Lydia Harper who was embezzling money from her business to fund your various ventures?" "Objection," Julian's attorney called out weakly. "Sustained," the judge said, but the damage was already done. The prosecutor continued her methodical destruction of Julian's credibility. Email after email, bank record after bank record, each piece of evidence painted the picture of a man who knew exactly where his funding was coming from and didn't care about the consequences. I testified the following day, presenting my forensic analysis of the financial crimes. The jury listened intently as I explained how the embezzlement scheme worked, how the money was transferred, and how Julian's businesses served as laundering mechanisms for stolen funds. "Mr. Harper," Julian's attorney said during cross-examination, "isn't it true that you only discovered this alleged embezzlement after learning about your wife's affair?" "That's correct." "So your investigation was motivated by revenge, not justice?" I looked at the attorney for a long moment before answering. "My investigation was motivated by the discovery of financial irregularities. The fact that those irregularities were connected to my wife's adultery doesn't make them any less criminal." "But you admit you were angry about the affair?" "I was disappointed. But anger doesn't create fraudulent bank records. It doesn't forge invoices or create phantom transactions. The evidence exists independent of my emotional state." "Isn't it possible that you misinterpreted legitimate business transactions?" I pulled out a folder from my briefcase. "Would you like me to walk through each transaction individually? I have documentation for all $230,000. We can start with the $15,000 payment to Coastal Restaurant Supply for equipment that was never delivered to a restaurant that doesn't exist." The attorney quickly moved on to other topics. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Julian Marks was found guilty on all counts: conspiracy to commit embezzlement, money laundering, and fraud. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison and ordered full restitution. Lydia, who had already begun serving her 5-year sentence, watched the proceedings from the gallery. She looked older, worn down by months in federal custody. When our eyes met, she quickly looked away. After the trial, I stood outside the courthouse with Mick and my attorney. Reporters shouted questions, but I ignored them. The story had already been told in the courtroom, under oath and with proper documentation. 12 years, Mick said. That's a long time. Not long enough, my attorney replied. He stole nearly $250,000 and showed no remorse. The judge was actually quite lenient. What happens to the money? I asked. Restitution payments will come from the sale of their assets. The boutique, Julian's cars, Lydia's jewelry, everything they bought with stolen money. You'll recover most of your losses, though it might take a few years. As we walked to our cars, I noticed Nina Greer standing across the street. She'd been subpoenaed as a witness but hadn't been charged with any crimes. The investigation had revealed that she knew about the affair and suspected financial irregularities, but there wasn't enough evidence to prove criminal involvement. She approached me hesitantly. Brooks, can I talk to you for a minute? Mick and my attorney continued to their cars, giving us privacy. Nina looked nervous, constantly glancing around as if expecting federal agents to emerge from the shadows. I wanted to apologize, she said, for what I said at the bar that day. I was angry and scared. You were protecting your friend. I was protecting myself. I knew something wasn't right with the boutique's finances, but I didn't want to know the details. I thought if I didn't ask questions, I couldn't get in trouble. That's a dangerous way to live. I know that now. She paused, gathering courage for whatever she wanted to say next. Lydia asked me to give you a message. I'm not interested. She said to tell you she's sorry, that she never meant for things to go this far. I considered this for a moment. Nina, Lydia spent 5 years stealing money and lying about it. She didn't accidentally stumble into a $250,000 embezzlement scheme. She planned it, executed it, and would have continued if she hadn't confessed to the affair. She loves Julian. She loves the idea of Julian, the excitement, the danger, the fantasy of a different life. But love doesn't justify theft, and it doesn't excuse the consequences of criminal behavior. Nina nodded sadly. I lost my job because of this. No one in town will hire me. They all think I was involved. Were you? No, but I didn't stop it either. That's something you'll have to live with. But Nina, you're young enough to start over. Move somewhere new. Build a different life. Learn from this experience instead of being destroyed by it. She walked away without another word, leaving me alone outside the courthouse where justice had finally been served. 1 year after Lydia's confession, I sat in my newly renovated office reviewing the final restitution payment. The federal asset seizure had recovered $215,000 of the stolen money. Not a complete recovery, but close enough to constitute a victory. The boutique had been sold to a young couple who turned it into a coffee shop. Julian's luxury car had been auctioned, along with all the expensive toys he'd bought with stolen money. Even Lydia's jewelry collection had been liquidated, including the diamond earrings I'd given her for our first anniversary. My divorce had been finalized 6 months earlier. Uncontested, as promised. Lydia had signed away any claim to our assets from her prison cell. She'd also provided a complete written confession detailing every aspect of the embezzlement scheme, ensuring that no stone was left unturned in the federal investigation. The house felt different now, larger somehow, without Lydia's presence filling it with drama and deception. I'd kept the Victorian we'd renovated together, but I'd changed everything that reminded me of our marriage. New furniture, new paint, new memories to replace the old ones. Mick knocked on my office door, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the new shop downstairs. Thought you might need a break from all that paperwork. Just finishing up the final accounting, I said, accepting the coffee gratefully. The restitution case is officially closed. How much did you recover? Enough. More than most victims of financial crimes ever see again. Mick sat down across from my desk, noting the packed boxes stacked against the wall. Still planning to move? Portland office opens next month. I'll keep this place for overflow work, but it's time for a change of scenery. Can't say I blame you. This town's been talking about nothing but your case for the past year. It was true. Ashcroft had embraced the scandal with the enthusiasm of a community starved for entertainment. The local newspaper had run a series of articles about financial crime prevention. The mayor had used the case as justification for new business oversight regulations. Even the high school had invited me to speak about forensic accounting as a career option. I'd become something of a local celebrity, though not the kind I'd ever wanted to be. "Any word from Lydia?" Mick asked. "She writes letters sometimes, I don't read them." "And Julian?" "Julian's discovered religion, according to his attorney. Apparently, federal prison has given him time to reflect on his life choices." Mick laughed. 12 years is a lot of reflecting time. My phone buzzed with a text message from Agent Chen. The federal investigation had expanded beyond Lydia and Julian's crimes. Their case had led to discoveries of similar schemes in 3 other states. My documentation methods were being used as a model for other financial crime investigations. "Justice Department wants me to consult on similar cases," I told Mick. "Apparently, scorned spouses make excellent forensic accountants." "You going to do it?" "Maybe. Turns out I have a talent for exposing financial criminals who think they're smarter than they are." We finished our coffee in comfortable silence, watching the afternoon traffic move through downtown Ashcroft. The town looked the same as it had a year ago, but everything had changed. Lydia's boutique was gone. Julian's failed businesses had been liquidated. Nina had moved to Boston, where no one knew about her connection to the scandal. And I had transformed from a boring accountant into the man who'd brought down one of the region's most sophisticated embezzlement schemes. "You know what I realized?" I said, as Mick prepared to leave. "What's that?" Lydia was right about one thing. I was her financial safety net, but she never understood that safety nets have limits. Push them too hard and they don't just break, they snap back. Mick grinned, and when they snap back, they hit pretty hard. Harder than she ever imagined. That evening I drove past the federal prison where Lydia was serving her sentence. I didn't stop or attempt to visit. There was nothing left to say between us. She'd made her choices, and I'd made mine. The consequences belonged to both of us now, but only one of us was living with them behind bars. Julian's prison was 3 states away, too far for casual visits, even if I'd been inclined to make them. His 12-year sentence meant he'd be middle-aged when he was released, assuming he served his full term. His dreams of entrepreneurial empire had ended with him learning to make license plates and attending mandatory financial responsibility classes. The irony was perfect. The man who'd stolen money to fund his business fantasies was now being taught basic budgeting skills by federal correctional officers. As I drove home to my empty Victorian house, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this point. A year ago, I'd been a faithful husband living a comfortable lie. Tonight, I was a divorced man who'd helped send 2 people to federal prison for stealing from me. Most people would consider that a tragedy. I considered it an education. I'd learned that marriage vows mean nothing to people who view relationships as financial opportunities. I'd learned that love and theft can coexist in the same heart, poisoning both. Most importantly, I'd learned that justice isn't always dramatic or immediate, but it's always thorough when properly documented. The house was quiet when I arrived home. No arguments about money, no mysterious phone calls to secret lovers, no lies disguised as innocent explanations, just silence, honesty, and the satisfaction of a job well done. I poured myself a drink and sat in my study, surrounded by the case files that had consumed my life for the past year. Tomorrow, I'd start packing for Portland. New city, new office, new cases to investigate. The federal consulting work would keep me busy, and the change of scenery would help me build a different kind of life. But tonight, I wanted to savor the completion of the most important audit I'd ever conducted. Every transaction had been traced. Every crime had been documented. Every criminal had been prosecuted. The books, as they say in my profession, were finally balanced. Lydia had confessed to loving her ex and seeing him behind my back for 5 years. She'd laughed about using me as a financial safety net while funding her true love's failed dreams with stolen money. 48 hours later, she'd received an envelope that destroyed her life. Justice, I'd discovered, was the most satisfying audit of all.